At 35, she had spent over a decade working in corporate marketing in the heart of Chicago, early mornings, late nights, and weekends sacrificed to tight deadlines and ambitious goals. But beneath the hustle, she held a quiet dream. One day she told herself she would have a place of peace. A place just hers. Somewhere still, somewhere green, somewhere with water. And then, after years of saving and researching listings, it happened. She founded a quaint lake house tucked away just an hour outside the city, its wooden deck hovering just above the shoreline, surrounded by whispering pines and the steady hush of waves. It wasn't grand or luxurious. It was better, cozy, honest, real. To Caroline, this wasn't just property. It was sanctuary. She pictured everything in vivid color, sunrise coffees on the porch, Saturday afternoons with a book in her lap and her feet curled beneath her, evenings filled with laughter from friends visiting for the weekend. A fire crackling in the hearth. Simple meals cooked slowly. Long walks in the woods. A life finally breathing again. She was proud, and even more so because she had done it herself. The down payment came from her savings. The mortgage was hers alone. Jason, her husband of 5 years, had always encouraged her to chase her dreams, but this one, she chased on her own terms. And now she was ready to share it with him. Jason, a freelance structural engineer, had been supportive from the moment she first showed him the listing. He was warm, soft-spoken, and deeply loyal. The kind of man who remembered how you liked your coffee and always carried an extra pair of gloves just in case she forgot hers. Caroline had fallen in love with him slowly but deeply, especially after one night when, broken by grief and weight gain after her father's death, she told him he didn't have to stay. That night, he proposed to her. "You're still you," he had said. "That's all I'll ever want." That memory gave her strength. She trusted him. She believed they were a team. They began planning the lake house life together, sketching room layouts on napkins, comparing paint swatches, and browsing vintage shops for a perfect dining table. Caroline found herself daydreaming more freely than ever before. She could picture Jason tinkering with the fireplace, her cooking dinner with music playing low in the background. Maybe one day, even a child's laughter echoing down the hall. It was supposed to be their next chapter, a fresh beginning, stitched with healing and soft joy. For the first time in years, Caroline felt like life was unfolding gently in her favor. She had no idea it was already starting to unravel. But it was a Thursday evening, the kind where the lake outside shimmered with golden light and the scent of rosemary chicken filled the kitchen. Caroline stood barefoot at the stove, humming softly as she stirred the pot. Jason was by the window, his silhouette framed against the fading sky. She glanced at him, heart full, thinking how lucky she was to have both this home and this man. Then he turned. "Caroline," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "we need to talk." She turned off the stove, the wooden spoon resting with a soft clink on the counter. The shift in his tone made her stomach clench. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, still smiling, though her heart had already begun to race. "What's going on?" she asked, searching his face. He exhaled slowly, like bracing for impact. "Sarah and Ethan are coming over this weekend," he said carefully. "They're going to be staying with us. For a little while." At first, she blinked, unsure she'd heard him right. "Wait, what?" He nodded, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "Sarah lost her job. She's going through a tough time. And Ethan, he's not doing great either. He needs me. And honestly, there's more than enough space here." Caroline stared at him, the words landing like small cracks across a frozen lake. Sarah, his ex-wife, Ethan, his teenage son, she'd never resented them, but moving in. "You're saying they're going to live with us," she repeated, trying to keep her voice level. "Just for a few weeks," Jason said quickly. "Until Sarah gets back on her feet. It's better than her blowing money on a tiny apartment. And Ethan could use some calm. This place, this home, it's perfect for that." A dull ache bloomed in her chest. This place, her place, the one she'd saved for, planned for, poured herself into. Her sanctuary was being offered up like a spare bedroom. "And when were you planning to tell me this?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "After their bags were on the porch?" Jason looked away, jaw tight. "I didn't want to stress you out. I figured it'd be easier if I just handled it." Handled it. Poängsamla till treating mig blamerd. As if her opinion didn't matter. She felt her fingers curl into fists on her lap. "Jason, this isn't just a house. This is our home. The one we built together. You can't just decide something like this without even asking me." "They're family," he said simply. "It's the right thing to do." And with that, he stood, reached for his coffee mug, and took a sip like the conversation was over. Caroline sat frozen, the weight of his decision pressing down on her like the lake fog outside the window. She looked around the stone fireplace, the bookshelves she had filled, the walls they had painted together. It no longer felt like hers. She didn't speak. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure he saw her at all. This wasn't the first time Caroline had felt blindsided. 6 months earlier, back when they still lived in their downtown apartment, Jason had walked in one evening, dropped his keys on the counter, and said casually, "Sarah and Ethan will be staying with us for a bit. Just 3 weeks. Her lease is up and she needs time to find a new place." 3 weeks. Caroline had looked up from her book, surprised but trying to stay calm. "You already told her yes?" "She has nowhere else to go." "It's just temporary," he said, pouring himself a glass of water like it was the most natural thing in the world. "It'll help her save up. We have the space." What she wanted to say was, "This is our space. You don't get to offer it up without asking me." What she did say was, "You could have at least talked to me first." Jason shrugged. "It's not a big deal. She'll be in the guest room. We'll barely notice." But Caroline did notice. She noticed the way Sarah slipped into their home like she'd never left Jason's life. The way she cooked dinner each night, meals that filled the apartment with comforting smells but made Caroline feel like a stranger in her own kitchen. Lasagna on Mondays, roast chicken on Thursdays. Plates washed, table set, wine glasses lined up like clockwork. She noticed the way Jason laughed more during dinner, recounting old stories with Sarah that made her feel like a third wheel at their own table. She noticed the way Ethan called Jason Dad with a new kind of closeness, staying up late to watch movies with him on the couch, while Caroline sat alone in the bedroom, trying not to feel replaced. And then came the moment that would never leave her. One Saturday afternoon, she came home early from the grocery store and froze at the doorway. Sarah was sitting on the couch, folding Jason's laundry, his shirts, his socks, even the t-shirt Caroline had bought him for his birthday. She walked in slowly, her voice tight. "You don't have to do that." Sarah looked up, her smile too smooth. "Oh, it's no trouble. I know you're busy, and I don't mind helping out." Helping out? Like Caroline was some distant cousin passing through. She wanted to scream, but instead, she clenched her jaw and walked into the bedroom, heart pounding. That night, she told Jason how she felt. That Sarah's presence wasn't just inconvenient, it was invasive. She expected him to understand. Instead, he chuckled. Are you really getting jealous? Come on, that's kind of cute." He kissed her forehead and went back to his book like her discomfort was nothing more than a passing mood. And she stayed silent. Because she wanted to believe it was temporary. That Jason would notice, that he'd realize the difference between being a good father and being a careless husband. But the weeks turned into months. Sarah didn't leave. Her new job kept getting pushed back. Jason started working from home, and their tiny apartment no longer felt like it belonged to both of them. It felt like Sarah had moved back into a life she used to own and Jason had never told her no. Caroline, meanwhile, had become the one sleeping next to a man who couldn't see the storm he'd let through the front door. So when Jason told her, once again, that Sarah and Ethan would be moving into the lake house, Caroline didn't just feel surprised. She felt history repeating itself. Only this time, it wasn't just their apartment. It was her dream. By the following Sunday, Sarah and Ethan had arrived. Caroline stood at the front door as Jason helped unload their bags from the trunk. The soft gravel crunched underfoot, the same gravel she once imagined welcoming close friends or visiting family. Now it sounded like intrusion. Sarah greeted her with a polite smile, a casserole dish balanced in her hands. "I thought I'd take dinner off your plate tonight," she said cheerfully. Caroline forced a nod. "Thanks." Inside, the house began to shift. Sarah placed throw pillows in new spots, rearranged kitchenware for convenience, and stocked the fridge with her own groceries. Ethan set up his gaming console in the living room, cables trailing across the floor like roots digging in. Caroline tried to stay composed. She told herself this was temporary, just a few weeks. But within days, the home that once smelled of lavender and fresh coffee now carried the scent of someone else's perfume. Sarah's perfume, Sarah's shampoo in the guest shower, Sarah's slippers by the back door. Jason, meanwhile, acted as if everything was perfectly normal. One afternoon, Caroline walked in to find Jason and Sarah laughing over old photo albums on the dining table. Caroline stood there for a second too long, unseen, unnecessary. Later that night, she sat beside Jason in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling. "I feel like I don't exist here," she said softly. He sighed. "Caroline, you're overthinking it. They're just guests." She turned to face him. "No, Jason. Guests ask to be here. Guests don't rearrange your home or take over your kitchen. This isn't right." He sat up, running a hand through his hair. "You're blowing it out of proportion. It's just a rough patch. Ethan needs stability, and Sarah, she needs help." "What about me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Do I get to need anything? Or is it just assumed that I'll be fine because I always am?" Jason didn't answer right away, and when he did, it wasn't what she hoped for. "I'm doing what I think is best, for everyone." Everyone, as if she was just another item on the list. Caroline stared at him, trying to find a trace of the man who once knelt in their living room and promised to choose her, no matter what shape life took. But he wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes were tired, detached. And so she rolled away, her back to him, staring at the shadows on the wall. Every creak of the house sounded louder now. Every little sound reminded her that this was no longer the refuge it once was. It had become something else. A compromise. And she was the only one bleeding for it. It happened on a Wednesday evening. Caroline came home early from a client meeting that had been mercifully canceled. She was hoping for quiet, maybe an hour on the porch, a glass of wine, the lake breathing peace into her bones. Instead, the house was silent in a different way. She stepped into the bedroom and froze. Sarah stood in front of the open closet, methodically organizing hangers. Jason's shirts were folded in a neat pile on the bed, his socks matched and stacked. Sarah reached for one of Caroline's sweaters, casually smoothing it across her arm, like she had done this 100 times before. Caroline's voice was sharp. "What are you doing?" Sarah turned, caught mid-motion. "Oh, I was just helping Jason sort through some of his things. He mentioned wanting to make more space." "For what exactly?" Caroline asked, the chill in her voice unmistakable. Sarah blinked, as if caught off guard by the tone. "It's just organizing. I thought I'd be helpful." Caroline clenched her jaw. "This is my bedroom, my closet. You have no right to touch anything here." Jason walked in then, holding a glass of iced tea. He stopped at the door, sensing the tension. "Everything okay?" Caroline turned to him, eyes blazing. "Did you ask her to do this? To go through our things?" He looked surprised. "No, I just mentioned the closet was a mess. I didn't know she'd start sorting it." Sarah stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." But the damage was done. Caroline left the room and walked straight to the living room, Jason following close behind. "You don't see it, do you?" she said, her voice trembling now. "She's not just here to recover. She's everywhere. She's folding your shirts. She's in our bedroom. She's cooking your favorite meals. And you," her voice cracked, "you're letting it happen." Jason rubbed his forehead. "Caroline, don't turn this into a competition. Sarah's the mother of my son. She's going through a hard time." She stepped closer, her voice low but fierce. "And I'm your wife. I'm the one who stood by you when I was barely holding myself together. And when I lost my dad, when I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror anymore, I still showed up. Every day. For you. And now you can't even show up for me." Jason looked down, silent. Caroline continued, her voice breaking. "This house was my dream. I worked for it. I imagined us building something new here. But now it's like I'm a guest in someone else's life. I don't feel seen, Jason. I don't feel loved. I feel erased." He finally met her eyes. "What do you want me to do? Kick them out? Tell Ethan he can't stay with his dad?" She stared at him for a long moment. "No," she said softly. "I want you to choose me. But I don't think you will." And with that, she walked away past the fireplace they were supposed to restore together, past the kitchen, where her mother's stew recipe once simmered with warmth. She went to the guest room, closed the door, and let the silence finally break. This time into tears. That night, Caroline didn't sleep. She lay awake in the guest room, the ceiling fan spinning in slow, hypnotic circles above her. Down the hall, she could hear Ethan's laughter, the clink of plates in the sink, and Jason's voice calm, steady, as if nothing had shattered in the last few hours. By morning, something inside her had shifted. She got up before the sun rose and made herself coffee, staring out over the lake as steam curled from the mug. For the first time in months, her thoughts weren't spinning in chaos. They were sharp, still, decided. She remembered something her father used to say, "Don't let people build their comfort on your silence." So she stopped being silent. Caroline reached out to her attorney that afternoon. The lake house had been purchased solely in her name, something she hadn't thought twice about at the time. Jason had insisted she take the lead. Now, that decision was her anchor. Within days, the paperwork was filed. The house would be legally protected, including a notice restricting long-term guests not listed on the deed. When Jason came home that Friday evening, he found her sitting at the dining table, a manila folder laid neatly in front of her. "What's this?" he asked. She looked him in the eye. "These are boundaries, legal ones." He flipped through the papers, frowning. "You're serious?" She nodded. "This is my home, Jason. You're welcome in it, but not as someone who disregards me. Not as someone who hands over my space without a conversation. Not as someone who continues to make me feel small." Jason's voice lowered. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "No," she said, "what you did was subtle, but it was constant, and it chipped away at me day by day. And I let it because I loved you. Because I believed you still saw me." He stood there for a long moment, quiet. Then he said the words she'd half expected, half feared. "So what now?" Caroline's response was calm. "Sarah and Ethan need to leave by the end of the week. So you can stay if you're ready to rebuild this with honesty. If not, I'll be fine. Either way, I'm choosing peace." Jason didn't argue. Maybe he saw it in her eyes that she wasn't bluffing, that she wasn't going to plead or plague, that she wasn't the woman who used to spiral into self-doubt when her jeans didn't fit or when Sarah folded his laundry. This Caroline was clear. This Caroline had learned that self-respect was not selfish. It was survival. By Sunday, Sarah and Ethan were gone. No dramatic scenes, no shouting matches, just silence and packed bags. Jason lingered a little longer, but the space between them remained. Eventually, he left too. And Caroline? She stayed. She poured herself into work, redesigned the guest room into a home studio, picked out curtains she loved without compromise. She hosted her best friend for wine on the porch. She read, she healed. Sometimes she still missed Jason, not the man he became, but the man who once knelt beside her and promised a life built on love and respect. But she never once regretted asking him to leave. Because in choosing herself, she finally made the lake house what it was always meant to be. A home. Hers. Caroline's story isn't about revenge in the way most people picture it. There were no loud confrontations, no public scenes, no grand declarations meant to humiliate. Her revenge was quiet, steady, rooted in dignity. She didn't throw anyone out in a fit of rage. She simply reclaimed what was already hers, her space, her voice, her peace. She set boundaries not out of anger, but out of necessity, because she had spent too long being erased in the very life she helped build. And in the end, she didn't ask for an apology. She didn't need one. Because choosing herself clearly, calmly, and without shame was the closure she'd been looking for. To anyone watching who's ever felt invisible in their own home, who's ever watched their dreams become background noise to someone else's convenience, you are not asking for too much. You're asking to be respected, to be seen. And that's not only fair, it's essential. If Caroline's story resonated with you, leave a comment. Tell us what part hit home. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories that remind you what quiet strength truly looks like.